Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Family, Mr. Peter is not well, and you all know this. But I have to be honest, he is not happy with me as the temporary host. I know many of you miss him, and so does he. Some of his loyal family members have unsubscribed, and that truly hurts. If I have disappointed any of you, I am deeply sorry. Maybe today could be my last day here, but before anything else, let's begin with a heartfelt prayer from our Heavenly God. For you, my beautiful family. Dear Heavenly Father, today, I lift up this beautiful family before you. Lord, you see their struggles, their silent battles, and the burdens they carry in their hearts. Some are facing pain, some are feeling lost, and some are simply tired from life's endless storms. But you, Lord, are the God of comfort, of peace, and of restoration. Please, Father, wrap them in your love. Wipe away their tears, ease their worries, and remind them that they are never alone. Let them feel your presence in their darkest moments, and give them strength to keep going even when life feels unbearable. Bless their homes, their families, and their dreams. Protect them from harm and fill their hearts with hope. Let them know that no matter how hard life gets, you are still in control and you have a beautiful plan for each of them. Lord, we ask this with faith, believing that you hear our cries and that your love never fails. In Jesus' name, we pray. Amen. Now, let's begin today's story. Spring in Atlanta wove magnolia perfume through the evening air as Billie Angel Elliott stood before her bedroom mirror, watching her reflection transform. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, straightening each curl into submission, a ritual she'd perfected during her final year at Harvard Law, when she first understood that brilliance alone wouldn't open certain doors in the South's corporate circles. The emerald silk gown Jude had selected for tonight's Carter Foundation Gala draped perfectly across her curves, a testament to both his exacting standards and the hours she spent maintaining the physique he deemed appropriate for a corporate wife. The diamond collar at her throat caught the light, beautiful and constricting, much like her marriage. Mrs. Elliott, Rosa, their housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. Mr. Elliott is asking about your progress. Billie noted the slight tremor in Rosa's voice, understanding the weight behind this simple message. Time management was another of Jude's obsessions, every minute precisely allocated to maintain their carefully curated image. Thank you, Rosa. Billie's smile was genuine for the older woman who had become a quiet ally in this gilded prison. Please tell him I'll be down shortly. As Rosa retreated, Billie allowed herself a moment to remember the woman she'd been before becoming Mrs. Elliott. Top of her class at Harvard Law, with dreams of arguing civil rights cases before the Supreme Court. The fire in her eyes back then had attracted Jude initially, though she now understood he'd seen it as a challenge to be conquered rather than a strength to be nurtured. The grand staircase of their Buckhead mansion curved beneath her heels as she descended, each step measured and graceful. Jude waited at the bottom, every inch the powerful executive in his bespoke tuxedo. His approval of her appearance came with a possessive smile that never quite reached his eyes. Perfect timing, he said, though they both knew she was exactly 3 minutes later than his preference. The car's waiting. The ride to the Atlanta History Center passed in calculated silence, broken only by Jude's occasional comments about expected attendees and appropriate topics of conversation. Billie watched the city lights blur past, remembering another car ride 3 years ago, the night he'd proposed with a precision that should have warned her of what was to come. She'd been fresh from winning her first major case, flush with victory and professional pride. Jude had seemed impressed by her legal strategies, engaged with her ambitions. The ring he'd offered came with promises of partnership, of combining their talents to create something revolutionary in Atlanta's corporate landscape. Reality had emerged slowly, like dawn creeping across their imported marble floors. First came the subtle suggestions about her appearance, her natural hair deemed unprofessional for certain circles. Then the gradual shift in their conversations, her legal insights interrupted with comments about social obligations and proper etiquette for a corporate wife. The History Center's grand ballroom glittered with Atlanta's elite as they made their entrance. Billy noted the familiar patterns in the crowd's reaction, the polite smiles that didn't quite mask their assessment of her presence among them, the carefully worded compliments about how articulate and polished she was. "Margaret Whitmore's watching," Jude murmured, his hand settling possessively at her waist. "Her husband's position on the Pierce Industries board makes her particularly important tonight." The mention of Pierce Industries sent a ripple of tension through Billy's composed facade. Jude's announcement of her new position as their senior corporate counsel had been presented as a gift, recognition of her legal expertise. But the timing, just as she'd begun discussing returning to civil rights law, felt calculated. "Mrs. Elliott," Margaret's voice carried across the marble floor with practiced charm, "that gown is simply divine against your complexion." "Thank you, Margaret." Billy's response was smooth, perfected through countless similar exchanges. "Jude has impeccable taste." "Indeed he does." Margaret's gaze flickered between them, hungry for any hint of discord. "I understand congratulations are in order. Senior corporate counsel at Pierce Industries. How progressive of them." Before Billy could respond, a shift in the room's energy drew their attention to the entrance. Zane Micah, Pierce Industries' CEO, moved through the crowd with quiet authority that contrasted sharply with the calculated power plays around him. Billy had researched him extensively since accepting the position, analyzing his business strategies and public appearances. But nothing in her preparation had captured the intensity of his presence or the way his gaze swept the room with genuine interest rather than social calculation. When his eyes met hers, something electric passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit trapped in the intricate dance of corporate politics. His slight nod acknowledged her directly, not as an extension of her husband, but as a person worthy of individual respect. "Billy." Jude's fingers pressed into her waist with subtle warning. "Let's greet your new employer properly." They approached Zane with measured steps, each movement part of the choreography Jude had perfected for such occasions. But as they drew closer, Billy felt an unfamiliar flutter of genuine emotion beneath her practiced poise. "Mr. Micah," Jude's voice carried the polished charm he reserved for business dealings, "allow me to properly introduce my wife, Billy Angel Elliott. Though I suppose you'll be seeing plenty of her starting Monday." "Mrs. Angel Elliott." Zane extended his hand, and Billy noted that he used her hyphenated name, the one she'd insisted on keeping professionally, despite Jude's disapproval. "Your reputation precedes you. That paper you published on international trade law and its impact on developing nations was particularly impressive." The genuine appreciation in his voice caught her off guard. It had been years since anyone in Atlanta's social circles had acknowledged her professional accomplishments without filtering them through her role as Jude's wife. "Thank you, Mr. Micah." She met his gaze directly, feeling something long dormant stir in her chest. "I look forward to contributing to Pierce Industries' growth. Please call me Zane." His blue eyes held steady on hers, and Billy noticed Jude's fingers tighten incrementally against her back. "We maintain a relatively informal atmosphere among the senior team. I find it promotes better collaboration." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of careful conversations and strategic social maneuvers. But something had shifted in Billy's world. As she watched Zane Micah move through the crowd, she recognized that Pierce Industries might offer more than just another gilded cage. It could be the first step toward reclaiming her own identity. Later that night, as their driver guided them through Atlanta's quiet streets, Billy gazed out the window while Jude reviewed emails on his phone. The city lights blurred past like stars, and she allowed herself to feel a flutter of hope. Tomorrow she would select her own outfit for her first day at Pierce Industries. It would be something subtle but powerful, a small act of defiance against the comfortable prison of expectations that had slowly closed around her these past 3 years. I trust you'll remember what we discussed about appropriate presentation at the office, Jude said without looking up from his phone. Pierce Industries is traditional, conservative. Billy caught her reflection in the window, seeing the elegant twist that contained her natural curls. Of course, she replied softly, but in her mind she was already planning to let one curl escape its confines. A tiny rebellion, but a beginning. Their Buckhead estate emerged from the darkness, its Georgian columns rising like prison bars against the night sky. As Billy climbed the marble steps, each heel click echoing through the soaring foyer, she felt the weight of her golden cage more acutely than ever before. But tonight, for the first time in years, that weight came with a spark of defiance. In Zane Micah's direct gaze and acknowledgement of her professional identity, she'd glimpsed a possibility of freedom she'd almost forgotten existed. In her private dressing room, removing the evening's armor of diamonds and silk, Billy studied her reflection. Beneath the perfect makeup and controlled curls, she saw a flicker of her former self. The fire that had once driven her through law school, the passion that had made her dream of changing the world. The night air carried the scent of gardenias through her open window, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird sang. Billy closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she could reclaim her voice, her power, her identity. First, though, she would have to remember how to spread her wings in a cage that had grown so comfortable. She'd almost forgotten it was a prison. But as she drifted off to sleep in her wing of the mansion, far from Jude's master suite, Billy felt the first true smile in years curve her lips. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since accepting Jude's ring, she felt ready to face them. The woman who had graduated the top of her class at Harvard was still there, beneath the polished surface of Mrs. Elliot, and that woman had never needed anyone else to define her worth. Chapter 2. Dangerous Eyes. Pierce Industries' executive floor gleamed with understated power, Italian marble and Brazilian hardwood, creating an atmosphere of cultivated success. Billy Angel Elliott's arrival for her first day as senior corporate counsel drew subtle attention, her tailored navy suit and naturally styled hair marking a deliberate departure from Atlanta's expected corporate aesthetic. The corner office designated for her position offered commanding views of the city skyline. As she arranged her credentials and legal volumes on glass shelves, Billy allowed herself a moment to appreciate the symbolism. From this height, her old law firm was visible, where she'd first caught Jude's attention during a merger negotiation. She'd been opposing counsel then, fierce and uncompromising, before he'd begun the careful process of containing her fire. A knock at her door interrupted her reflection. Mrs. Angel Elliott? Her new assistant, Sarah Chen, entered with a stack of files. Mr. Micah requested these for your review before the morning meeting. The Thompson Group merger has some concerning irregularities. Billy accepted the files, noting Sarah's efficient organization. Thank you, and please call me Billy. Of course, Sarah's smile held genuine warmth. Though you should know, you're already causing quite a stir. The last senior counsel insisted on formal titles and strict hierarchical protocols. The hidden message was clear. Changes were possible here if one was brave enough to initiate them. Billy spent the next hour immersing herself in the Thompson Group documentation, her legal instincts firing at full capacity for the first time in years. By the time her intercom buzzed with a summons to Zane's office, she'd identified several strategic concerns that would have significant implications for the merger. The CEO's corner suite occupied the building's prime position, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Atlanta's bustling downtown. Zane rose from behind his imposing desk as she entered, his presence commanding yet somehow more approachable in this professional setting. "Mrs. Angel Elliott." He gestured to the leather chairs facing his desk. "Thank you for coming up. I trust you've had a chance to review the merger documents." "Please call me Billy." She settled into one of the chairs, arranging her files with practiced precision. The morning sun caught the silver at his temples, lending him an air of distinguished authority that contrasted with his relatively young age for a CEO. "And yes, I've identified several areas of concern." "Show me." He moved to sit beside her rather than maintain the barrier of his desk, close enough that she caught the subtle scent of his cologne. Something expensive but understated, like everything else about him. For the next hour, they worked through her analysis. Zane asked incisive questions that challenged her thinking. But unlike the patronizing tone she'd grown accustomed to in corporate settings, his queries demonstrated genuine respect for her expertise. "The Malaysian subsidiary's financial statements," she explained, indicating a particularly complex section, "don't align with their reported market penetration. There's a pattern of discrepancies that suggests potential manipulation. Similar to what you uncovered in the Westbrook case?" His reference to her most significant pre-marriage victory caught her off guard. "I followed that litigation closely. Your strategy for proving financial misconduct was brilliant. The fact that he'd researched her professional history, not just her current status as Jude's wife, stirred something dangerous in her chest. You're very well informed about my past cases. I make it a point to know the accomplishments of all my senior staff." His smile held genuine appreciation. "Though I must admit, your work on international trade law particularly caught my attention. The way you handled the cultural nuances in cross-border disputes was innovative." Their discussion expanded beyond the Thompson merger, delving into broader legal strategies and corporate philosophy. Billy found herself engaged in the kind of intellectual discourse she'd been starved for, her mind fully challenged for the first time in years. "We should continue this discussion," Zane said as their meeting drew to a close. "Perhaps over dinner in the executive dining room? There are several other cases I'd value your perspective on." The invitation was professional, yet something in his eyes suggested deeper appreciation. Billy thought of the carefully scheduled dinners Jude arranged, where her role was to charm and decorate rather than contribute. That would be... She hesitated, aware of the dangerous territory they were approaching. "Appropriate, given the complexity of these cases." "Excellent." Zane's smile reached his eyes, creating fine lines that spoke of genuine emotion rather than practiced charm. "Sarah can coordinate the details, unless, of course, your husband objects to late meetings." The question carried weight beyond its surface inquiry. Billy straightened her spine slightly. "My professional commitments are my own to manage, Mr. Micah." "Zane," he corrected gently. "We're colleagues now, Billy. Equals in this endeavor." The word equals resonated through her with unexpected force. How long had it been since anyone had seen her that way? Over the next several weeks, those evening strategy sessions became a dangerous lifeline to her former self. Away from the performance required in her marriage, Billy found her legal expertise flourishing. Zane challenged her thinking, valued her insights, and most dangerously of all, encouraged her to embrace her natural beauty rather than conform to Atlanta's conservative corporate expectations. "The Singapore expansion proposal," he said one evening as they reviewed documents in the executive dining room, "would benefit from your expertise in Asian business culture. Would you be interested in leading that initiative?" Billy looked up from her files, caught off guard by both the opportunity and the way his gaze lingered appreciatively on her face. She'd worn her hair in its natural curls that day, a small act of defiance that Jude would certainly comment on later. "That's a significant responsibility," she said carefully. "The board might have concerns about assigning such a crucial project to someone like me." "You mean the most qualified attorney in our legal department?" Zane's voice carried an edge of protective anger. "Anyone who questions your capabilities will answer to me directly." The fierce support in his tone made her breath catch. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" But his eyes held understanding of her deeper question. "Treating me like a professional equal, encouraging me to be myself." She gestured to her natural hair, her choice of bold professional attire. "Most executives prefer their senior staff to maintain a more conservative image." Zane set aside his files, giving her his full attention. "Do you know what I saw when I researched your background?" He waited for her slight headshake before continuing. "I saw a brilliant legal mind being systematically diminished. Every case you handled before your marriage showed incredible innovation and courage. Then suddenly, your career became a series of carefully controlled appearances at charity galas and social functions." His words cut straight to the heart of her carefully maintained facade. "My marriage to Jude opened certain doors and closed others," he finished softly. "Doors you used to break down on your own merit." Thunder rolled outside, heralding an approaching storm. Billy stood and moved to the windows, needing distance from the dangerous truth in his words. "You don't understand the complexities of Atlanta's social structure." "Don't I?" He joined her at the window, close enough that she felt the heat of his presence, but not so near as to be inappropriate. "The careful dance of power and presentation? The way certain circles use diversity as a shield while actively working to contain it." Lightning illuminated the city, casting harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the weight of his words. "Someone with your brilliance, your natural beauty, your fierce spirit. Watching you be caged by social expectations is like watching art being locked away in a vault. You deserve to shine, Billy. To be celebrated for exactly who you are." His words stirred something dangerous in her soul. Not just desire, but a desperate longing for freedom she'd almost forgotten how to want. When she turned to face him, the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "We should focus on the Singapore proposal," she said softly, retreating to safer professional ground. "Of course." But his smile held understanding of everything she couldn't say. "Though I hope you'll consider leading the project. The board meets next week to finalize assignments." Later that night, as she prepared for bed in her private wing of the mansion, Billy caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman gazing back seemed different somehow. More alive, more herself. Her natural curls framed a face that had begun to remember how to shine. A text from Jude lit up her phone. "Dinner tomorrow with the Whitcombs. Wear the blue dress I bought you. Hair appropriately styled." Once, such commands would have been met with immediate compliance. Now, something rebellious stirred in her chest. Tomorrow she would attend the dinner, play her role as the perfect corporate wife. But in her mind, she was already crafting legal strategies for the Singapore expansion, imagining herself standing in Asian boardrooms, commanding respect through expertise rather than careful social performance. The storm outside intensified, but for once the thunder didn't make her flinch. Instead, it felt like an accompaniment to the growing tempest in her soul. In Zane's eyes, she'd caught glimpses of who she used to be, and more dangerously, who she could become if she dared to break free. Sleep eluded her as she lay in her perfectly appointed bedroom, thinking of the way Zane looked at her with such genuine appreciation, not just of her beauty, but of her mind, her spirit, her natural self. It was a dangerous path she was contemplating, but for the first time in years, danger felt like freedom rather than fear. Tomorrow would bring more careful navigation of social expectations and marriage obligations. But tonight, in the privacy of her thoughts, Billy allowed herself to imagine a future where she could be both powerful and authentic, both successful and free. The storm raged on outside her window, nature's rebellion against artificial constraints. Inside her chest, an equally powerful storm was building, one that threatened to shatter every cage she'd allowed to be built around her. Chapter 3. Forbidden Dance. The Ritz-Carlton's Grand Ballroom had been transformed for Pierce Industries' annual charity gala, crystal chandeliers casting ethereal light across marble floors imported from Italian quarries. Billy Angel Elliott paused in the entryway, allowing herself a moment to absorb the opulent scene before her. Her gown, a creation of deep burgundy silk that draped elegantly across her curves, represented her first genuine act of defiance against Jude's careful curation of her image. "It's too bold," he'd said earlier that evening, his disapproval evident in the rigid set of his jaw as she descended their mansion's grand staircase. "The color, the cut, it's not appropriate for your position." But 2 months of working alongside Zane Micah had awakened something in her that could no longer be contained by Jude's narrow definitions of appropriateness. Her natural curls were styled in an elegant updo that managed to be both sophisticated and true to her heritage, with deliberate tendrils framing her face in subtle rebellion. The crowd parted subtly as they made their entrance, Atlanta's elite offering practice smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Billy had learned to read the underlying currents in these social gatherings, the whispered judgments, the careful calculations of power and influence, the constant assessment of who was rising and who was falling in the city's complex social hierarchy. "Mrs. Elliott." Margaret Whitmore's voice carried across the marble floor with deliberate volume. "How brave of you to choose such a striking ensemble." Billy met the older woman's gaze with newfound confidence. "Thank you, Margaret. I find it suits the occasion perfectly." The slight emphasis on "I" wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Jude's fingers pressed into the small of her back with familiar warning, but tonight the gesture failed to inspire its usual fear. Instead, she felt only a quiet anger at how long she'd allowed such subtle controls to dictate her existence. "Darling," Jude's voice carried that dangerous smoothness she'd grown to recognize. "Perhaps we should greet the Thompson Group executives. Richard was asking about you earlier." The implied threat in his tone was clear. Richard Thompson's position on Pierce Industries' board made him particularly important to Jude's corporate schemes. But before they could move in that direction, the energy in the room shifted perceptibly. Zane Micah's entrance drew attention not through any deliberate effort on his part, but through the natural authority he carried. His tuxedo, perfectly tailored to his athletic frame, spoke of wealth without ostentation. But it was his eyes that caught and held Billy's attention, intense, appreciative, and holding something that made her pulse quicken. He moved through the crowd with easy grace, accepting greetings but never lingering long enough to be drawn into the usual social games. When he reached them, his greeting was perfectly proper yet somehow intimate. "Mrs. Angel Elliott." His use of her professional name carried weight in this setting. "You look absolutely stunning tonight. That color suits you perfectly." The compliment, delivered with genuine appreciation rather than Jude's usual calculating assessment, made her skin warm. "Thank you, Mr. Micah. The gala committee has outdone themselves this year." "Indeed." His smile held secrets only they shared, late-night strategy sessions where they discussed more than just corporate law, moments when his appreciation of her intelligence had made her remember who she'd been before becoming Mrs. Elliott. "Though I'm particularly looking forward to your presentation on the Singapore initiative next week. Your analysis of the cultural implications for international arbitration was brilliant." Jude's hand tightened fractionally at her waist. "Yes, my wife has always had a particular talent for cultural sensitivity." The live orchestra began a new piece, the strings carrying a hint of sensual danger that seemed appropriate for the moment. Zane's expression shifted subtly as he extended his hand. "Would you honor me with a dance?" The request was formal, yet his eyes held challenge. "I'd love to discuss the Singapore proposals further." It was a masterful move, combining business with pleasure in a way that made refusal difficult without seeming improper. Billy felt Jude's fingers flex against her spine before he stepped back with a cold smile. Of course, business is business after all. Zane led her onto the dance floor with confident ease, his hand settling respectfully at her waist. But even that proper touch sent electricity racing through her body. They moved together as if they'd practiced for years, finding a natural rhythm that drew admiring glances from other couples. "You're trembling," he observed softly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "The air conditioning," she lied, though they both knew the real reason. His eyes dropped to where her silk sleeve had shifted slightly, revealing the edge of a bruise on her wrist, a souvenir from Jude's displeasure over a late-night working session the previous week. Zane's expression darkened momentarily before he carefully schooled his features. "You deserve so much more than this," he murmured as they turned gracefully across the floor. "Your brilliance, your spirit. Watching him dim your light is like watching someone cage a star." The poetry in his words, so different from Jude's calculated compliments, made her heart ache. "We shouldn't discuss the Singapore expansion?" His eyes held a knowing glint. "Or acknowledge that you've been dimming your fire to fit into the cage he's built around you?" Their bodies moved in perfect synchronization as the music swelled. Billy was acutely aware of every point of contact between them, of the strength in his hand at her waist, of the way he led without attempting to control. "You're playing a dangerous game," she whispered, though she made no attempt to increase the proper distance between them. "I'm not playing at all." His thumb traced a subtle pattern against her waist. "I see you, Billy. Not the polished corporate wife, not the trophy he parades at events. I see the brilliant lawyer who graduated top of her class at Harvard. The woman whose legal articles I've read multiple times because your insights are that compelling." The music carried them across the floor, and Billy felt years of careful restraint beginning to crack. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you deserve to be seen." His blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. "Because watching him dim your fire makes me want to burn down every cage he's built around you." From across the room, she could feel Jude's stare burning into them. But for once, she couldn't bring herself to care. Dancing with Zane felt like waking up from a long sleep, like remembering who she'd been before she'd started shrinking herself to fit into Jude's ideal mold. The orchestra transitioned into another piece, and Zane smoothly adjusted their steps. His hand at her waist was both respectful and possessive in a way that made her skin tingle. This wasn't the cold possession Jude exhibited, but something warmer, something that spoke of partnership rather than ownership. "The Singapore contracts," he said, loud enough for nearby dancers to hear, maintaining their business pretense. But his eyes told a different story. "Your revisions were brilliant. The way you identified the potential cultural conflicts in the arbitration clauses, it saved us from a major diplomatic misstep. The local customs regarding dispute resolution are often overlooked," she replied, falling into the familiar rhythm of legal discussion while their bodies continued their intimate dance. "Western firms tend to impose their standard procedures without considering the impact on Asian business relationships." "Exactly." His smile held genuine appreciation. "Your understanding of international nuance is exceptional. I've doubled the legal department's budget for the next fiscal year, specifically to support your initiatives." The music rose to a crescendo, and Zane executed a perfect turn that brought their bodies closer together for a moment. Billy caught the subtle scent of his cologne, something expensive but understated, like everything else about him. Later that night, as their driver navigated the quiet streets toward the Buckhead estate, Billy sat in perfect silence beside Jude. The space between them on the leather seat might as well have been an ocean. She could feel the fury radiating from him, carefully contained until they were behind closed doors. But tonight, something had changed. The memory of Zane's respectful touch, of the way he saw and valued her true self, had awakened something that couldn't be caged again. As they passed the Pierce Industries building, its windows gleaming in the night sky, Billy touched her wrist where Zane's fingers had brushed so gently against her bruise. Tomorrow would bring consequences: Jude's anger, society's whispers, the weight of appearances she had to maintain. But for now, she allowed herself to remember the feeling of being truly seen, truly valued. In Zane's arms, if only for a dance, she'd remembered who she was meant to be. Chapter 4: Taste of Freedom. Miami's sophisticated coastline painted a dramatic canvas against the approaching storm, steel gray clouds transforming the usual turquoise waters into something darker and more dangerous. Billy Angel Elliott stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Four Seasons suite, watching lightning dance across Biscayne Bay while her phone displayed the 15th missed call from Jude in 3 hours. The Pierce Industries merger negotiations had required her presence in Miami, a fact that had triggered Jude's barely contained fury. She recalled his reaction when Zane had announced her role in leading the international team. "It's inappropriate," Jude had said, his voice carrying that dangerous calm that always preceded his worst moments. The crystal tumbler in his hand had caught the study's lamplight, amber liquid trembling with his suppressed rage. "Send someone else from legal, someone more seasoned." But Zane had stood firm during the partners' meeting, his quiet authority silencing even Richard Thompson's thinly veiled objections. Mrs. Angel Elliott's expertise in international corporate law makes her uniquely qualified for this negotiation. Her presence is non-negotiable. Now, 3 days into the discussions, Billy felt more alive than she had in years. Away from Atlanta's suffocating social circle and Jude's constant surveillance, she'd found herself standing taller, speaking with more authority, letting her natural intelligence and wit shine through. The Malaysian representatives had initially balked at taking direction from a woman, particularly a woman of color, but her masterful handling of complex legal precedents had earned their grudging respect. A message from Zane lit up her phone. "Storms intensifying. Car waiting in lobby to take you to final meeting." The invitation-only restaurant occupied the top floor of a historic South Beach hotel, its panoramic views now dominated by the approaching tempest. Billy arrived to find Zane already seated in a private dining room, various documents spread across the mahogany table. The sight of him, jacket discarded and sleeves rolled up as he studied contract details, stirred something dangerous in her chest. "The Malaysian representatives just called," he said as she took her seat, his eyes warming with appreciation at her professional attire. A cream silk blouse and tailored charcoal skirt that emphasized her curves without apology. "Their flight's been grounded due to the weather. They won't make it until tomorrow." Thunder rolled across the sky as if emphasizing his words. Billy opened her portfolio, hyper-aware of his presence across the table. "We should use the time to review their latest counter-proposal. Their additions to Section 7 could impact our existing contracts in Singapore." Always focused on the details, his smile carried a warmth that made her pulse quicken. "That's what makes you exceptional at your job, though I suspect it's also what makes you dangerous to those who prefer compliance over competence." The implied reference to Jude hung between them as they worked through the documents. The storm intensified, each crash of thunder seeming to shake the building's foundation. When the power flickered ominously, Zane's phone lit up with a message. The hotel's evacuating due to flood warnings, he said, scanning the text. My beach house is 15 minutes away and has a generator. We can continue working there. Billy hesitated, knowing how the situation would appear. Images of Atlanta society's reaction flashed through her mind, the whispered judgments, the carefully crafted rumors that could destroy her professional reputation. But as rain lashed against the windows and lightning split the sky, she realized she had little choice. That would be sensible, she said carefully. Zane's driver navigated them through streets that were quickly becoming treacherous. Palm trees bent in the wind as they pulled up to a sophisticated modern structure perched above the shoreline. By the time they made it inside, they were both soaked despite the brief dash from car to door. Let me get you something dry to wear, Zane said, taking in her drenched appearance with concern that went beyond professional courtesy. My sister keeps some clothes here for when she visits. Alone in his elegant guest bathroom, Billy changed into the offered clothing, soft gray loungewear that felt like cashmere against her skin. She unwound her hair from its professional twist, letting her natural curls fall free. The woman in the mirror looked younger, less constrained, more like the person she'd been before becoming Mrs. Elliot. When she emerged, she found Zane had also changed into casual clothes that did nothing to diminish his natural authority. He'd set up their work materials in his home office, the space illuminated by elegant battery-powered lamps that cast a warm glow against the storm's darkness. I made tea, he said, gesturing to a delicate china cup that steamed invitingly. I remember you mentioned preferring it over coffee during late meetings. The simple consideration, remembering such a small detail about her preferences, made her throat tight. When was the last time someone had paid attention to what she actually wanted, rather than telling her what she should want? They resumed their work, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. Perhaps it was the storm raging outside, or the intimacy of being in his private space, or simply the accumulation of months of careful restraint finally reaching its breaking point. This clause here, Billy said, leaning closer to indicate a section of the contract. Her damp curls brushed against Zane's shoulder, and she felt him go very still. Billy. His voice was low, roughened with emotion he'd kept carefully controlled until now. Look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his, and the intensity she found there stole her breath. His hand came up to brush a stray curl from her cheek, the touch feather-light but charged with meaning. Tell me to stop, he whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with exquisite gentleness. Tell me this isn't what you want, and I'll never mention it again. Lightning illuminated the room in stark white flashes, throwing dramatic shadows across his features. Billy knew she should pull away, should maintain the professional distance they'd cultivated so carefully. But the storm outside seemed to match the one raging in her heart, wild and unstoppable. I can't, she breathed, and the words felt like both surrender and victory. His kiss was nothing like Jude's possessive claims. Zane's lips moved against hers with passionate reverence, as if she was something precious to be cherished rather than possessed. His hands cradled her face with the same gentle respect he'd always shown her mind and spirit. When they finally parted, breathing heavily, the storm seemed to pause with them, a momentary lull in the thunder that left only the sound of rain against windows and their racing hearts. You're trembling, Zane observed, his fingers tracing the curve of her shoulder with careful attention. I'm not cold, she answered, and this time it wasn't a lie. He drew her closer, one hand tangling in her curls, while the other traced patterns of devotion across her back. You're extraordinary, he murmured against her skin. Your brilliance, your strength, everything about you deserves to be celebrated, not contained. Each touch, each kiss was an act of worship that made her forget years of being treated like an ornament. Zane's reverence awakened parts of her soul that had been dormant, wrapped in the soft cashmere and softer promises of a different kind of life. The storm raged through the night, but within the sanctuary of Zane's beach house, Billy found a different kind of weather. Warm rain of gentle kisses, thunder of racing hearts, lightning of passion finally unleashed. Every moment was a revelation, a rediscovery of the woman she'd been before society's expectations had caged her. Dawn found them tangled in Egyptian cotton sheets, the first rays of sun breaking through dissipating clouds. Zane traced lazy patterns along her spine as Billy watched Miami's skyline emerge from the storm's aftermath. "Stay," he whispered against her hair. "Not just tonight. Stay and be who you were always meant to be." The invitation hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Outside, the storm began to gentle, as if nature itself was holding its breath for her answer. Billy turned in his arms, studying the sincerity in his eyes. "It's not that simple," she said softly. "Jude won't let me go easily, the social implications alone. Then we'll fight him together." Zane's voice carried the same quiet authority he brought to the boardroom, but tempered with deep emotion. "You deserve to be free, Billy. Free to practice law the way you always dreamed. Free to be brilliant without apology." She touched his face, memorizing the strength and tenderness there. "There will be consequences. Atlanta's corporate world isn't known for its forgiveness of scandal." "Worth it." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You're worth any consequence, and you're stronger than they know. Stronger than you remember being." Their phones buzzed simultaneously. The Malaysian representatives had rebooked their flight and would arrive that afternoon. Reality began to intrude on their sanctuary, but something fundamental had changed. As they prepared for the day ahead, Billy watched Zane move through his morning routine with easy grace. He handed her a fresh cup of tea, prepared exactly as she liked it, and the simple gesture nearly brought tears to her eyes. How long had it been since someone had cared about her preferences rather than dictating them? The Miami sun painted everything in bright new colors as they made their way to the final negotiations. Billy felt transformed, not just by the physical passion she'd discovered in Zane's arms, but by the emotional freedom of being truly seen and valued. Her phone displayed another missed call from Jude, but for the first time, his attempts at control inspired determination rather than fear. She had survived being decorative. Now it was time to remember how to be substantive. The Malaysian representatives were waiting in the conference room when they arrived. If they noticed anything different about the dynamic between Billy and Zane, they kept it hidden behind professional courtesy. But as Billy led the final negotiations, her natural authority shining through, she caught Zane watching her with quiet pride. By sunset, the contracts were signed, the merger secured on terms that favored Pierce Industries while respecting cultural sensitivities. It was a masterful piece of legal work, the kind Billy had dreamed of doing before marriage had redirected her ambitions. Later, in the privacy of her hotel suite, Billy stood at the window watching Miami's nightlife come alive. Her reflection showed a woman transformed, confident, powerful, awakened. The bruises from Jude's last attempt at control had faded, but the memory of Zane's gentle touch remained, a promise of what life could be. Tomorrow they would return to Atlanta, to the complicated dance of professional propriety and social expectations. But something essential had changed. Like the storm that had forced them together, passion and freedom had swept away years of careful constraints. Billy touched the window, watching her reflection smile with genuine joy. She had tasted freedom now, not just physical liberation, but the deeper freedom of being valued for her whole self. There would be no going back to the cage, no matter how gilded its bars. Chapter 5. Hidden moments. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Zane Micah's private penthouse, painting patterns across Brazilian hardwood floors and illuminating the elegant space that had become their sanctuary. Billy Angel Elliott stood by the window, wrapped in cashmere, watching Atlanta's skyline emerge from dawn's mist. 2 weeks had passed since their return from Miami, and they'd settled into a delicate dance of professional propriety and private passion. During office hours, they maintained careful distance, their interactions limited to legal consultations and board meetings. But in the evenings, hidden away in Zane's sophisticated midtown penthouse, they discovered each other in ways that went beyond physical attraction. Here, away from society's judgmental gaze, Billy found herself blooming into the woman she'd always been meant to be. "You're thinking too loud," Zane's voice carried from the kitchen where he prepared their morning coffee. Another ritual he'd perfected, learning exactly how she preferred the artisanal Ethiopian blend he specially ordered. The domesticity of such moments still caught her off guard, so different from the cold efficiency of her mornings at the mansion. Billy smiled, watching his reflection in the window as he approached. He moved with that natural grace that had first caught her attention, confident but never overbearing. "I'm thinking about the Morrison portfolio presentation today." Liar. He handed her the perfectly prepared coffee, his free hand settling at her waist with familiar intimacy. "You've had that presentation ready for days. Try again." She leaned back against his chest, allowing herself to savor these precious moments of freedom. "I'm thinking about how different you are from what I expected that first night at the Carter Foundation Gala." "Different how?" His thumb traced circles against her hip, a gesture both soothing and stimulating. "I thought you'd be like all the other executives, seeing me as either a diversity quota or an exotic trophy." She turned to face him, studying the way early sunlight emphasized the distinguished silver at his temples. "Instead, you saw me, the real me." Zane set their coffee cups aside, his hands coming up to frame her face with characteristic gentleness. "How could I not see you? Your brilliance lights up every room you enter." His kiss was slow, thorough, not the desperate passion of their first night in Miami, but something deeper that made her soul ache with recognition. When they parted, his eyes held that intensity that never failed to make her breath catch. "I want to capture this," he said softly, tucking a curl behind her ear. "Not just the physical beauty, though God knows you're stunning, but this moment of you being completely yourself." He moved to retrieve something from his study, returning with a professional-grade camera. "Trust me?" Billy felt her pulse quicken, but not from fear. With Zane, trust had become as natural as breathing. She let the cashmere wrap slip slightly, revealing the elegant curve of her shoulder. "Always." The next hour unfolded like a dream as Zane directed her with gentle suggestions, his artist's eye finding ways to capture not just her physical form, but the essence of her transformation. The morning light played across her dark skin like a lover's caress, creating striking contrasts against the white silk sheets he draped artfully around her. "Beautiful," he murmured, but his eyes held more than mere appreciation of aesthetics. Each click of the shutter felt like a revelation, documenting this version of herself she was rediscovering, confident, sensual, unashamed. Between shots, he showed her the images on the camera's display, and Billy found herself stunned by the woman she saw there. Gone was the carefully controlled corporate wife. In her place was someone wild and free, her natural beauty a testament to her reclaimed identity. "This is how I see you," Zane said softly, showing her a particularly striking black and white image where she gazed directly into the lens, all pretense stripped away. "Strong, magnificent, unapologetically yourself." Billy touched the camera screen, tracing the image of herself with wonder. "I almost forgot she existed. This version of me." She was always there. Zane set the camera aside, drawing her into his arms, just waiting for the chance to emerge. Their lovemaking was slow and sweet, the camera forgotten as they lost themselves in each other. Afterward, wrapped in the warmth of Egyptian cotton sheets, Billy studied the play of light across Zane's features. "The board meeting next week," she said, trailing her fingers along his jaw. "Jude will be there." "I know." Zane caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "We'll handle it. Your legal strategy for the Asian expansion is flawless. He won't be able to touch you professionally. It's not the professional arena I'm worried about." Billy sat up, letting the sheets pool around her waist. "He's been different lately, more controlling. Last night, he commented on my changed appearance, the way I've been wearing my hair natural." His voice had that edge to it, the one that usually precedes his worst moments. Zane's expression darkened. He sat up beside her, his hand settling protectively at the small of her back. "Has he hurt you?" "Not physically, not yet." Billy's voice was steady, but Zane could feel the slight tremor in her body. "But he's always been skilled at other forms of control. The night we returned from Miami, he had dinner served in his study, a formal affair with all my favorite dishes from our courtship. It should have been romantic, but every bite tasted like a threat." Zane's arms tightened around her. "You don't have to go back. We can end this now, get you out safely." "It's not that simple." She turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "Jude's influence in Atlanta runs deep. The moment I leave, he'll make sure I never practice law in this city again. And it's not just my career. He's been making veiled comments about my family's property in Georgia, my grandmother's home. Blackmail." Zane's voice carried a dangerous edge. "We can fight that legally." "Can we?" Billy stood, moving to the window where the morning sun had grown stronger. In this city, with his connections, he spent years cultivating his image as the progressive businessman who married a black woman. Any move I make against him will be twisted into me being the ungrateful wife who betrayed him. Zane followed her to the window, his reflection appearing beside hers in the glass. "Then we'll leave Atlanta. Pierce Industries has offices worldwide, London, Singapore, Dubai. You could practice international law anywhere." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Billy turned to study his face, seeing the sincerity there that never failed to humble her. "You would do that? Relocate your entire life? For you?" His smile was tender as he tucked a curl behind her ear. "In a heartbeat, but something tells me running isn't your style." "No." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his unwavering support. "I didn't spend years becoming the best corporate lawyer in Atlanta just to let Jude Elliott chase me away. There has to be another solution. Then we'll find it together." Zane's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. "In the meantime, I want you to start documenting everything, every threat, every controlling behavior. And I'm having my security team do a deep dive into his business practices." Billy raised an eyebrow. "You think he's hiding something?" "Men like Jude always are." Zane's expression was grim. "The careful image, the strategic philanthropy, it's usually hiding something ugly underneath." Their phones chimed simultaneously, a reminder of the morning's first meeting. Reality began to intrude on their sanctuary, but something fundamental had shifted. The woman captured in Zane's photographs, strong and free, wasn't just an image anymore. She was becoming real, emerging from years of careful containment like a butterfly from its chrysalis. As they dressed for the day ahead, Billy caught Zane watching her with that mix of pride and protection that never failed to touch her heart. "What?" "Just admiring my favorite view." His smile held warmth and wickedness in equal measure. though the city skyline isn't bad either. She approached him, straightening his tie with practiced intimacy. We should be more careful at the office. I've noticed Margaret Whitmore watching us with particular interest lately. Let them watch. Zane caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her wrist. You've done nothing wrong, Billy. Being brilliant, being yourself, those aren't crimes, no matter what Atlanta society might think. The morning sun had fully risen now, painting the city in shades of possibility. As they prepared to return to their professional roles, Billy felt stronger than she had in years. The photographs Zane had taken would remain their secret, artistic black and white testimony to her awakening. But the confidence they captured, that she would wear openly, like armor against whatever storms approached. They rode down in the private elevator separately, maintaining the careful appearance of propriety. But as Billy drove toward Pierce Industries, she felt Zane's love wrapped around her like an invisible shield. Whatever Jude was planning, whatever society might whisper, she was no longer alone in her fight for freedom. The woman in the photographs, strong, sensual, unafraid, was no longer just an image. She was becoming reality, one liberated moment at a time. Chapter 6. Rising Storm. The crystal decanter made a distinctive sound as Jude Elliott poured his third scotch of the evening, amber liquid catching the light from his study's antique desk lamp. Billy sat across from him, her posture perfect despite the late hour, watching her husband's movements with the careful attention of prey tracking a predator. The Singapore merger, he said, his voice carrying that dangerous smoothness that always preceded his worst moments. Your handling of it has drawn considerable attention within the board. The deal was complex, Billy replied, keeping her tone professional. International arbitration requires careful consideration of cultural nuances. Indeed, Jude's smile didn't reach his eyes as he studied her over the rim of his glass. Though I wonder if it required quite so many late nights with Zane Micah. The accusation hung in the air between them, heavy with threat. Billy maintained her composure, though her heart raced beneath her silk blouse. Mr. Micah values thorough legal analysis. As CEO, his involvement in major international deals is expected. Mr. Micah, Jude's laugh carried no warmth. So formal. Yet I noticed at the Lawrence dinner tonight, you seemed quite comfortable calling him Zane. 3 months into their affair, and Billy had grown skilled at navigating these dangerous conversations. But tonight felt different. The careful mask Jude usually wore was slipping, revealing something darker beneath. The senior leadership team at Pierce Industries maintains a less formal atmosphere, she said, the practiced explanation feeling hollow even to her own ears. It promotes better collaboration. Jude set his glass down with deliberate care. And your new appearance? Is that also about collaboration? Billy's hand moved unconsciously to her natural hair, styled in an elegant twist that somehow felt like both defiance and defense. My professional presentation is entirely appropriate for my position. Your position? He stood, moving around the desk with predatory grace. A position I arranged, if you recall, one that could just as easily be rearranged. The threat was clear, but something had changed in Billy over the past months. Zane's respect, his encouragement of her true self, had awakened a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. My qualifications speak for themselves, she said, rising to meet his approach. My work on the Singapore merger saved Pierce Industries millions. The board has taken notice. The board. Jude's fingers wrapped around her wrist, tight enough to bruise. Or just one particular board member. The pain was familiar, but this time it sparked anger rather than fear. You're hurting me. Am I? His grip tightened fractionally. Strange. You never used to mind when I guided you, shaped you, made you into something worth presenting to society. Let go. Billy's voice was steady, even as her pulse thundered against his constraining fingers. For a long moment, Jude studied her face, as if searching for something he'd lost. Then his hand fell away, leaving a band of darkening skin that would require long sleeves at tomorrow's board meeting. "You've changed," he said, turning back to his scotch. "Your hair, your attitude, your growing independence. One might almost think you'd forgotten your place." "My place?" The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "As your trophy wife? The perfect black accessory to prove how progressive you are?" The crystal decanter shattered against the wall beside her head, sending shards and expensive scotch raining across imported wallpaper. Billy didn't flinch. Another change Jude seemed to notice, his eyes narrowing at her lack of fear. "Let me remind you of something, darling." His voice was soft, almost gentle, which made his words all the more threatening. "Your grandmother's property in Georgia, that charming little farm she's so proud of? The one that's been in your family since Reconstruction? I own it now." Ice slid down Billy's spine. "What? Did you think I'd leave something so important to chance?" Jude's smile was cruel. "I bought it through a subsidiary last year. Your grandmother's favorable rent arrangement could change very quickly if her granddaughter forgets her obligations." The pieces clicked into place. Why she'd stayed so long, why she'd accepted each small surrender of her identity. Not just for her own security, but for the legacy her ancestors had built, the land they'd worked so hard to keep in black hands through generations of struggle. "Now then," Jude straightened his tie, the perfect Southern gentleman once more. "About your appearance at tomorrow's board meeting, I think the gray suit I bought you last month would be appropriate, with your hair properly straightened, of course." Billy stood perfectly still, her mind racing through legal precedents and property laws. There had to be a way to fight this, to protect her grandmother without sacrificing herself. "The Lawrence Group dinner next week," Jude continued, as if he hadn't just threatened her family's heritage. "I expect you to be especially charming. Richard Lawrence has been asking questions about your close working relationship with Micah. It would be unfortunate if rumors began to circulate." The threat was layered, professional, personal, and racial. In Atlanta's corporate circles, a whisper of scandal could destroy more than just careers, especially when that scandal involved a black woman in a position of power. In the sanctuary of her private bathroom, Billy examined the darkening bruise on her wrist. The mark seemed to mock everything she'd built over the past months, her growing confidence, her rekindled ambition, her passionate liberation in Zane's arms. Her phone buzzed with a message from Zane. "You okay?" "You seemed tense at the Lawrence dinner." Tears threatened, but Billy forced them back. She had survived worse than Jude Elliott's threats. Her ancestors had survived worse. The property in Georgia was a chain, but chains could be broken. Instead of responding to Zane's message, she opened her laptop and began to work. If Jude had hidden the property purchase through a subsidiary, there would be records. As one of Atlanta's top corporate lawyers, she knew exactly where to look for paper trails. The night deepened around her as she built her case, document by document. Jude might own the land on paper, but paper could be challenged. Laws could be wielded like weapons by those who understood them. Dawn was breaking when she finally closed her laptop. Her wrist ached, but the pain only fueled her determination. Jude thought he had caged her completely, but he'd forgotten something crucial. She wasn't just his wife anymore. She was Billy Angel Elliott, Harvard Law graduate, senior corporate counsel, and a woman who had remembered how to fight. As she prepared for the board meeting, Billy chose her outfit carefully. Not the gray suit Jude had commanded, but a powerful white ensemble that made her dark skin glow. Her natural curls she arranged in a sophisticated style that spoke of confidence rather than compliance. Let Jude rage. Let society whisper. She had survived being ornamental. Now it was time to remember how to be instrumental. The bruise on her wrist she covered with an elegant gold bracelet, another gift from Jude, turned now into armor. Everything he had given her to enhance her cage, she would transform into weapons for her liberation. In her private car on the way to Pierce Industries, Billy finally responded to Zane's message. "We need to talk. It's time to end this game." The morning sun caught the Atlanta skyline, turning glass towers into mirrors of possibility. Somewhere in those towers, Jude Elliott thought he was tightening his control, but he had forgotten the most dangerous thing about caged birds. Eventually, they learned to sing songs of revolution. Chapter 7. Power Games. The Pierce Industries boardroom commanded a stunning view of Atlanta's skyline, but Billy Angel Elliott's attention was focused entirely on the documents before her. 3 weeks of careful investigation had yielded a pattern of questionable business practices in Jude's subsidiary companies, particularly regarding property acquisitions in historically black neighborhoods. "The evidence is irrefutable," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd developed over months of high-stakes negotiations. The Thompson Group's Asian subsidiaries have been systematically undervaluing properties owned by minority communities. Across the polished mahogany table, Jude's expression remained carefully neutral, but Billy recognized the dangerous glint in his eyes. This presentation wasn't just about the Thompson merger anymore. It was a declaration of war. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Elliott." Richard Thompson's voice carried a patronizing edge as he emphasized her married name. "Perhaps your personal relationship with certain board members has colored your judgment." The implied scandal hung in the air, but Billy didn't flinch. "The documentation speaks for itself, Mr. Thompson, including the interesting pattern of property acquisitions through Shell Corporation Beta, which seems to have a particular interest in historically significant black-owned lands." She watched Jude's fingers tighten fractionally around his pen, the only sign that her carefully aimed arrow had found its mark. The subsidiary that held her grandmother's property operated under that same corporate umbrella. "If you'll turn to page 47, she continued, her professional demeanor masking the satisfaction of watching both men squirm. "You'll find a detailed analysis of how these acquisitions correlate with upcoming development projects. The pattern suggests a deliberate strategy of cultural erasure for profit." "This is absurd." Jude's voice carried that dangerous smoothness she'd learned to recognize. "You're allowing personal bias to interfere with a legitimate business merger. Perhaps your own background is making you oversensitive to standard corporate practices. Is systematic discrimination a standard corporate practice at Elliott Enterprises?" Zane's question cut through the tension like a blade. He'd remained silent during her presentation, but now his blue eyes held a cold fury as he stared down his fellow CEO. "Watch yourself, Micah." Jude's mask slipped slightly, revealing the anger beneath. "Your interest in my wife's career is already raising eyebrows in certain circles. My interest is in protecting Pierce Industries from engaging in potentially illegal business practices," Zane replied smoothly. "Mrs. Angel Elliott's research suggests both Thompson Group and Elliott Enterprises have exposure to significant legal liability. As CEO, I'd be negligent to ignore these findings." The boardroom erupted into heated discussion. Billy maintained her professional composure, but beneath the table her hands shook slightly as she gathered her materials. This confrontation had been inevitable, but the stakes were higher than anyone in the room realized. "A word in private, darling." Jude's voice carried just enough threat to make it clear this wasn't a request. They moved to his private office down the hall, the space designed to intimidate with its dark woods and aggressive masculinity. The moment the door closed, his careful facade cracked. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "My job." Billy stood her ground, drawing strength from months of preparation. Or did you forget that's why you arranged this position, to showcase your progressive values? Don't play games with me. He moved closer, using his height to loom over her. You think I don't see what's happening? The way you're changing, the late nights with Micah, this sudden interest in Thompson Group's property dealings? Perhaps I'm simply living up to the potential you claimed to see in me. Her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. Isn't that what you wanted? A Harvard-educated wife to prove how forward-thinking you are? What I wanted, his fingers wrapped around her arm with bruising force, was an ornament who knew her place. Not this awakening you seem to be having. Let go of me. The words came out cold, controlled. Or shall I add workplace harassment to the evidence I've been gathering? His hand fell away as if burned. Evidence? Did you think I wouldn't investigate the subsidiary that purchased my grandmother's property? Billy's smile held no warmth. I'm a corporate lawyer, Jude. Following paper trails is what I do. You're playing a dangerous game, Billy. His voice dropped to a whisper. One that could have consequences far beyond your career. No, she stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated. You're the one who's been playing games, using my race as a shield for your discriminatory business practices, threatening my family's heritage to keep me in line. But you forgot something crucial. And what's that? I'm not just your trophy wife anymore. I'm senior corporate counsel at Pierce Industries, and I've documented every questionable deal, every discriminatory practice, every threat you've made. One call to the SEC and your entire house of cards collapses. The sound of his palm striking the desk echoed through the office. You wouldn't dare. The scandal would destroy you too. Perhaps. Billy moved toward the door, her confidence growing with each step. But I've survived worse than scandal. Have you? In the hallway, Zane waited with carefully concealed concern. Everything all right? Perfectly fine. Billy's smile carried genuine warmth as she met his eyes, though I believe Mr. Elliot may need a moment to compose himself. They walked together toward her office, maintaining professional distance despite the electricity crackling between them. Once behind closed doors, Zane's facade cracked slightly. He threatened you again. It wasn't a question. He tried. Billy perched on the edge of her desk, finally allowing her hands to tremble. But this time I threatened back. Zane moved closer, his presence both comforting and energizing. The property records you requested last week revealed exactly what I suspected. Jude's been using Shell Corporation Beta to acquire historically significant black-owned properties across the South. My grandmother's farm was just one piece of a much larger pattern. We can use this. Zane's legal mind was already working through strategies. Combined with the Thompson Group findings, it builds a compelling case for systematic discrimination. Yes. Billy's smile held a fierce edge, and Jude knows it. He's always been careful about his image, the progressive white executive championing diversity. This would destroy that narrative completely. You're incredible. Zane's admiration was evident in his voice, using his own weapons against him. I learned from the best. She allowed herself a moment to lean into his strength. Though the real battle is just beginning, Jude won't take this lying down. Let him come. Zane's protective instinct was clear in the set of his jaw. We've built an ironclad case. Between your legal expertise and my corporate influence, he can't touch you. But they both knew it wasn't that simple. In Atlanta's interconnected world of power and privilege, the coming war would be fought on multiple fronts. Professional, personal, racial, every aspect of their lives would become a battlefield. As if reading her thoughts, Zane's hand found hers, offering silent support. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Billy squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the connection. Outside her office windows, Atlanta's skyline stretched toward a stormy horizon, a fitting metaphor for the gathering clouds of conflict. The power games had shifted, pieces moving on a board that grew more complex by the day. But this time, Billy wasn't just a pawn in someone else's strategy. She was a queen, armed with knowledge, evidence, and the fierce determination of generations of strong black women who had fought their own battles for dignity and justice. Let Jude plot his revenge. She had survived being decorative. Now it was time to show him just how dangerous she could be when she decided to be destructive instead. Chapter 8: Breaking Chains. The private dining room at Atlanta's most exclusive restaurant vibrated with tension beneath its elegant veneer. Billy Angel Elliott sat across from her husband, watching him methodically slice into his Wagyu steak while her own plate remained untouched. The burgundy in her glass caught the candlelight, dark as blood. "Your investigation into Thompson Group," Jude's voice carried the practiced calm of a man accustomed to negotiating, "has attracted unwanted attention from certain board members." Unwanted by whom? Billy took a deliberate sip of wine, her composure masking the way her heart raced. The evidence of discriminatory practices is quite compelling. Evidence that you obtained through questionable means. Jude's knife scraped against fine china with slightly more force than necessary. Accessing subsidiary records without proper authorization could be construed as corporate espionage. All my research was conducted within the scope of my position as Senior Corporate Counsel. The title rang with quiet authority. The board granted me full access during the merger due diligence. The board. His smile held no warmth. Or just Zane Micah. The accusation hung in the air between them, heavy with threat. But Billy had spent weeks preparing for this confrontation, gathering ammunition like her grandmother had once gathered storm supplies, methodically, with clear-eyed understanding of the tempest ahead. Speaking of unauthorized access, she set her wineglass down with precise control, "I've discovered some interesting information about Shell Corporation, Beta's property acquisitions." The slight pause in Jude's movements was nearly imperceptible, but Billy had learned to read his tells over their years of marriage. Business matters hardly seem appropriate for dinner conversation, don't they? She withdrew a slim folder from her designer handbag. "I thought you'd be interested in the pattern that emerged, particularly regarding historically significant properties in black communities." "Careful, darling." His voice dropped to that dangerous whisper she'd learned to recognize. "You're treading on unstable ground." "Am I?" Billy opened the folder, revealing photographs that made Jude's face tighten imperceptibly. "These were taken at various properties acquired by your subsidiary. The timing of the evictions, the demographic patterns, it's quite striking." "If you think you can threaten me with circumstantial evidence..." "Oh, this is just the surface." She slid another document across the table. "The real story is in the financial trails. Shell companies within shell companies, all leading back to a particular account in the Cayman Islands. The same account that now holds the deed to my grandmother's property." Jude's careful mask cracked slightly. "You've been busy." "I learned from watching you." Billy's smile was sharp as a blade. "All those lessons about corporate strategy, about maintaining the right image while pursuing your real agenda. I paid attention. These allegations could damage more than just me." He leaned forward, voice low and threatening. "Your reputation, your career, everything we've built could crumble." "You mean everything you've built?" She met his gaze steadily. "The perfect power couple image. The progressive executive and his accomplished black wife. What would your board say if they knew how that image was constructed? The threats, the control, the carefully orchestrated discrimination hidden behind diversity initiatives." Speaking of images, Jude withdrew his phone, pulling up photographs that made Billy's breath catch, surveillance shots of her entering Zane's private penthouse, of intimate moments she'd thought were hidden from the world. What would society say about these? But Billy had anticipated this move. The same thing they'd say about your regular visits to that private club in Buckhead, the one that still maintains certain racial restrictions in its membership policies. Quite a contrast to your public persona. The tension between them crackled like lightning before a storm. Around them, other diners continued their elegant meals, unaware of the war being waged in quiet voices and careful threats. "You've changed," Jude observed, studying her with the cold calculation that had first attracted her in law school, before she'd recognized it as predatory rather than passionate. "No." Billy gathered her evidence back into the folder. "I've remembered who I was before you convinced me to forget. The woman who graduated top of her class at Harvard. The lawyer who dreamed of fighting for justice, not helping corporations exploit vulnerable communities. And Micah? Does he know about your crusade? Zane understands something you never did." She stood, smoothing her designer dress with practiced grace. "That I'm not a possession to be controlled or a trophy to be displayed. I'm a force to be reckoned with. A force that could lose everything." Jude's threat carried the weight of years of careful manipulation. "Your career, your social standing, your grandmother's legacy, all gone with one press release. Try it." Billy's voice held steel beneath its silk. "Release those photos. Paint me as the unfaithful wife, the angry black woman destroying a powerful white man's reputation. See how that plays in today's climate, especially once the evidence of your discriminatory practices goes public." She placed a USB drive next to his plate. "Everything's there. The property acquisitions, the eviction patterns, the offshore accounts. Enough to destroy not just your reputation, but your entire corporate empire." "You wouldn't dare." But there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes now. "The scandal would touch you too." "I've survived worse than scandal." She gathered her belongings with elegant efficiency. "I survived you, after all." As she turned to leave, Jude's voice carried that dangerous edge that had once made her tremble. "This isn't over." "No," she agreed, pausing at the private room's threshold. "But for the first time, you're not the one controlling how it ends." The Atlanta night embraced her as she emerged from the restaurant, the air heavy with impending rain. Her phone buzzed with a message from Zane. "Meeting finished." "Everything okay?" Instead of responding immediately, Billy took a moment to breathe in the charged atmosphere. Thunder rolled in the distance, promising a storm that would clear the air and wash away pretense. She had chosen the restaurant carefully for this confrontation, the same place where Jude had first proposed, where he'd begun the subtle process of reshaping her into his ideal trophy wife. Now it would be remembered as the place where she'd finally broken free of his carefully constructed cage. The evidence she'd presented was only part of her arsenal. Tomorrow, Pierce Industries' legal department would receive an anonymous tip about Thompson Group's discriminatory practices. By week's end, the SEC would be investigating Shell Corporation Beta's property acquisitions. Let Jude release the photos. Let society whisper and judge. She was done playing by rules designed to keep her contained and controlled. Finally, she typed a response to Zane. "It's done. The storm is coming." Lightning split the sky as her car pulled away from the curb, illuminating the Atlanta skyline in stark relief. Somewhere in that glittering landscape, Jude was probably already making calls, trying to contain the damage she'd set in motion. But Billy felt only peace as rain began to fall. She had spent years being decorative, years dimming her light to fit into the space Jude had designated for her. Now she was ready to shine with her full brilliance, to fight with all the fierce intelligence and determination she'd inherited from generations of strong black women who had faced down worse storms than this. The chains were broken, the cage door was open, and Billy Angel Elliott was finally, gloriously free to soar. Chapter 9: Hearts of Fire. Lightning illuminated the Buckhead Mansion study in stark flashes as Billy faced Jude across his mahogany desk. Outside, thunder rolled across Atlanta's stormy sky, a fitting backdrop to the confrontation unfolding within these walls. "You thought you could hide this from me?" Jude's voice carried dangerous calm as he held up her cache of evidence, documents proving years of discriminatory practices. "That I wouldn't discover your little investigation." "Hide it?" Billy's laugh held no humor. "I wanted you to find it, to understand exactly how much I know about Shell Corporation Beta's activities." Lightning flashed again, casting harsh shadows across Jude's aristocratic features as he rose from his chair. "You've forgotten your place." "No." She stood her ground, drawing strength from months of preparation. "I've finally remembered who I am." "And who is that?" He moved around the desk with predatory grace. "The woman who thinks she can destroy everything I've built, who believes she can escape the careful arrangements I've made." "You mean your ownership of my grandmother's property?" Billy's smile was sharp as a blade. "That precious leverage you've held over me." The study doors burst open before Jude could respond. One of his security staff entered, face tight with urgency. "Sir, there's been a breach at the gates. Mr. Micah." "Of course." Jude's laugh held an edge of madness. "Your white knight arrives right on schedule." Billy felt her phone vibrate in her pocket, Zane's promised signal. Everything was proceeding according to plan, though Jude didn't realize he was playing right into their strategy. "You should have stayed in your place," Jude continued, his mask of sophistication cracking further. "The perfect wife, the diversity initiative made flesh. Do you know how many doors opened because I had a Harvard-educated black woman on my arm? And now those same doors will slam shut when they learn how you've really been operating." Billy stood tall, her natural curls framing her face like a crown. "The evidence doesn't lie, Jude. Your entire empire of discrimination and control is about to crumble." The power cut suddenly, plunging the study into darkness, broken only by lightning flashes. In that electronic silence, Billy heard Jude's sharp intake of breath, the sound of a predator preparing to strike. "No power means no security cameras," his voice came from somewhere to her left. "No witnesses to what happens next." But Billy had anticipated this too. In her pocket, her phone was already transmitting everything to Zane's security team. "There are always witnesses," she said calmly. "Always a paper trail. Always consequences." She moved carefully in the darkness, remembering the self-defense training she'd been secretly taking for months. When Jude's hand grabbed her arm, she was ready. The move was precise, just as her instructor had taught her. In a flash, Jude found himself pressed against his own desk, his arm twisted behind him. "What the—" "I'm not your trophy anymore." Billy's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "And you're not as powerful as you think." Thunder crashed as Jude broke free, shoving her backward. But Billy maintained her balance, thanks to countless hours of practice. When she heard the distinctive sound of a gun being drawn, she didn't panic. "Put it down, Elliot." Zane's voice cut through the darkness, steady and commanding. "It's over." Lightning revealed the tableau, Jude with his gun raised, Billy standing her ground, and Zane in the doorway, his own security team flooding the study with flashlights. "Over." Jude's laugh held hysteria. "You think you can steal my wife and destroy my reputation without consequences?" "Your own actions destroyed your reputation," Billy said calmly. "I just gathered the evidence." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jude swung the gun toward her, but Billy was already moving. The self-defense training took over, a precise strike to his wrist, the weapon clattering to the floor, a swift knee to his solar plexus. As Jude crumpled, Zane's security team swarmed forward. In moments, the danger was contained, but Billy's heart still raced with adrenaline and triumph. "Are you okay?" Zane reached for her, his touch grounding her in reality. "I am now." She let herself lean into his strength just for a moment. "Did you get what we needed?" His smile held pride and passion. "Everything. The evidence is already with the SEC. By morning, Jude Elliott's entire empire will be under investigation." Later that night, as Zane's security team coordinated with local police and federal authorities, Billy stood in what had once been her prison. The mansion's elegant rooms held no more power over her. "Your grandmother's property is safe," Zane said softly, coming up behind her. "My legal team has already filed to reverse the transfer. She'll never have to worry about losing her home." Billy turned to face him, seeing in his eyes everything she'd been denied in her marriage: respect, partnership, passionate equality. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me, for seeing me." His kiss was tender but charged with promise. They had waited, maintained professional distance until Jude was dealt with legally. But now, in this house that had seen so many of Billy's tears, they created new memories of joy and passion. Dawn found them wrapped in each other's arms, their triumph and love expressed in every touch, every whispered promise. Outside, Atlanta's sky had cleared, the storm washed away to reveal a bright new day. "Ready to face the world?" Zane asked, tracing patterns of devotion across her bare shoulder. Billy smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in years. "With you, I'm ready for anything." As they dressed to face the media storm that would surely come, Billy caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman who gazed back was transformed, powerful, passionate, unapologetically herself. Let society whisper, let them judge. She had survived being decorative and emerged victorious. Now it was time to show the world exactly what Billy Angel Elliott could do when she was truly, completely free. Chapter 10. Empire of Desire. The Dubai sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop to the high-stakes negotiations unfolding in Pierce Industries' Middle Eastern headquarters. Billy Angel Elliott stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room, her tailored white suit a stark contrast against the desert sky. 3 months had passed since Jude's arrest, and her transformation from controlled wife to powerful corporate leader was complete. "The Al Rashid Group's counteroffer is aggressive," she said, turning to face the assembled executives. Her natural curls were styled in an elegant updo that spoke of confidence rather than compromise. "But their attempt to leverage Pierce Industries' recent publicity against us shows their desperation." The conservative businessmen shifted uncomfortably, still adjusting to taking direction from a black woman. But Billy had earned their respect over the past week of negotiations, her brilliant legal strategy cutting through cultural barriers with precise efficiency. "Mrs. Angel Elliott's analysis is correct," Zane's voice carried quiet authority as he joined her at the window. "The merger proceeds on our terms, or not at all." The setting sun caught the silver at his temples, and Billy felt the familiar thrill of watching him command a room. Their professional partnership had only grown stronger since their personal relationship became public, their complementary strengths creating an unstoppable force in the corporate world. As the Middle Eastern executives filed out to consider their position, Zane's hand settled at the small of her back, a touch both possessive and proud. "You were magnificent today." "The real test comes tomorrow," she said, though she leaned slightly into his touch. "When they realize we're not bluffing about walking away, they'll cave." His confidence in her was absolute. Your restructuring of the Asian subsidiaries was brilliant. They need this merger more than we do." The buzz of their phones interrupted the moment. Billy's breath caught as she read the message. Jude had escaped federal custody. "Security's already been notified," Zane said, his body tensing with protective instinct. "The building's locked down." But Billy felt oddly calm. "He'll come here," she said with certainty. "His ego won't let him run. He'll want one last confrontation." Later that night, in their royal suite at the Burj Al Arab, Billy's prediction proved correct. The notification came from hotel security. A man matching Jude's description had been spotted in the lobby. "Let him come," she said, standing in the suite's private salon. Her silk robe caught the light from Dubai's glittering skyline, making her dark skin glow. "I'm done running from him." Zane moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders with gentle strength. "You're not alone this time." Their kiss was passionate but brief, interrupted by the suite's security system, alerting them to an override attempt at the door. They separated smoothly, years of corporate strategy having taught them the value of perfect timing. When Jude burst in, brandishing a gun and wild-eyed desperation, he found them perfectly composed. Billy stood by the windows, Zane a protective presence at her side. "Still hiding behind him?" Jude's laugh held no humor. "The perfect power couple, building your empire on the ruins of mine?" "No one's hiding, Jude." Billy's voice was steady. "And nothing was built on ruins. We created something new, something honest." "Honest?" He gestured with the gun. "Like secretly investigating my company, like sleeping with another man while wearing my ring? Like using discriminatory practices to destroy black communities?" Billy stepped forward, unafraid. "Like threatening my grandmother's heritage to keep me controlled?" The gun wavered slightly. "Everything I did was for us, to maintain our position, our power." "No." Billy's smile held pity rather than fear. "Everything you did was for yourself. I was just another acquisition, another property to be controlled." Security burst in before Jude could respond, Dubai's elite forces taking him down with efficient precision. As he was led away in handcuffs, still shouting threats, Billy felt the last chains of her past finally break. Zane's arms encircled her from behind, strong and secure. "It's really over now." She turned in his embrace, seeing in his blue eyes the same fire that burned in her soul. Their kiss was passionate, charged with the electricity of triumph and freedom. Later, tangled in silk sheets that cost more than most cars, they celebrated their victory with intimate intensity. Every touch was a declaration of independence, every kiss a promise of partnership rather than possession. Dawn found them preparing for the final round of negotiations, the tension between them so electric that even their rivals noticed. But now that energy fueled their success rather than threatening it. In the end, Billy closed the billion-dollar deal herself, her legal expertise combining with natural authority to create an unstoppable force. The Al Rashid Group executives, who had initially balked at dealing with a black woman, now treated her with earned respect. The private elevator ride back to their suite became a celebration of passion and power. They had faced every challenge together: corporate rivals, social prejudice, Jude's desperate final attack, and emerged stronger. "What's next?" Zane asked later, tracing patterns of devotion across her bare skin as Dubai's lights twinkled below their window. Billy smiled, feeling the warm weight of the new ring on her finger. Not a symbol of ownership this time, but of equal partnership. "Everything," she said simply. "We can do everything." They had built something revolutionary, a partnership of passion and power, where neither had to diminish themselves to accommodate the other. Their love story had become a testament to breaking free from society's constraints, from racial prejudice, from the gilded cages of expectation. The sun rose over Dubai's skyline, painting the world in possibilities. Billy Angel Elliot, soon to be Angel Micah, stood wrapped in Zane's embrace, ready to take on whatever challenges came next. They had proven that true power comes not from control, but from freedom, not from possession, but from partnership. Their empire was built on desire, yes, but also on respect, on equality, on the fierce determination to change the world together. And that made it unstoppable.